Hey everyone, it is currently 6:54 a.m. and I am currently editing this video. Well, anyways, I just realized that I said a name wrong for this entire video. There's a character in the book named Stilgar. I guess I just read it too fast and always read it as Stigler. That is not correct, and I figured I'd put this little thing before I get to his character, because if I call myself out first, you guys can't call me out. I'm so tired. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Hello everyone, and welcome to Dag Explains, where I read books so you don't have to. Today we are talking about one of my favorite books of all time, Frank Herbert's 1965 sci-fi classic, Dune. I actually received a lot of requests to cover Dune in a video format, and I thought that with the new movie directed by Denis Villeneuve coming out soon, now would be the perfect time to break down this Goliath of a book for folks who don't have the time to read a 500-page sci-fi epic. There is actually so much to this book that it's actually technically 3 books, or acts as I refer to them. So I'll be splitting this into 3 videos covering and analyzing each act in depth. So without further ado, and no restraint on spoilers, I give you Dune, Act 1 by Frank Herbert. Dune begins on planet Caladan, which is ruled by Duke Leto of the House of Atreides. The House of Atreides is one of the houses of the Landsraad, the families that rule over the planets and planetary systems of the galaxy. Duke Leto's 15-year-old son, Paul, is in bed and pretends to be asleep, while his mother, Lady Jessica, and the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohayim check in on him. The old Reverend Mother mutters that Paul may be the Kwisatz Haderach, the prophesied chosen one who brings about great change in the universe. She says that the next day, Paul will meet her Gom Jabbar, a small needle that poisons and kills instantly unless he passes her test to find out whether Paul is human or animal. The next day, the Reverend Mother has him put his hand into a small box while she holds the Gom Jabbar to his neck. The box brings great pain to Paul, but he knows that if he moves, the Reverend Mother will stab him, poisoning and killing him instantly. He passes Mohayim's test, which means that he is a human being and not an animal. He then discovers that his mother took the same test long ago. Both her and the Reverend Mother are Bene Gesserits, members of an ancient school for psychic women that secretly controls every political move made in the galaxy. The 2 women reveal to Paul that something terrible will soon happen to the House of Atreides and that his father will die. They tell Paul that the Duke's death will happen soon after the Atreides move to Arrakis, the desert planet also called Dune, where the novel gets its name, currently ruled by their mortal enemies, House Harkonnen. Meanwhile, on Gadi Prime, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen reveals his plot to his nephew, Fade Rautha, and his servant, Pitter de Vries, a mentat, a human computer who uses logic and no emotion. You see, Dune actually takes place 10,000 years after a great war called the Butlerian Jihad. This war was against all thinking machines, as humanity had essentially become a slave to technology. During this war, all computers, AI, everything down to simple pocket calculators were outlawed and destroyed. Therefore, without computers, humanity had to undergo great evolutionary changes, creating the mentats, humans that have undergone great training to gain the ability to analyze and think like computers. The Baron has maneuvered the Emperor Shaddam IV, leader of the galaxy, into giving the planet Arrakis to the Atreides in exchange for planet Caladan. Though Arrakis is a desert planet and Caladan a lush one, this trade doesn't seem good for the Baron, as Arrakis is rich in melange, a spice and drug that is an addiction for millions of people throughout the galaxy. The Baron has arranged this trade because he plans to kill the Duke Leto and all his family once they are on Arrakis by using one of their own people to betray them. He and Pitter trade barbs as Fade Routha looks on passively. Back on planet Caladan, the Reverend Mother confronts Jessica and asks her why she did not have a daughter in accord with her Bene Gesserit orders. Jessica replies that she did so because the Duke wanted a son and heir very badly. The Reverend Mother chastises her, saying that now there is no Atreides daughter to be wed to a Harkonnen son and quote-unquote seal the breach between the two rival houses. Jessica and the Reverend Mother both know that the planet Arrakis is already lost, and that the Duke is as good as dead. They talk to Paul, and he recites a dream he had in which he meets a girl in a cave who calls him Usul. Later, Paul meets Thufir Hawat, the Duke's main strategist and master of assassins, in the training room. Hawat warns Paul of the dangers he will face on Arrakis, but tries to dispel Paul's fears that his father will be killed. He also mentions the Fremen, the native inhabitants of Arrakis. Hawat explains that the Fremen are a tough, resilient people, and they will have to be dealt with in some way by the Atreides. After Hawat leaves, Gurney Halleck, the Duke's war master, appears and challenges Paul to a training duel. Paul fights well, but Halleck makes the battle particularly difficult for him since he knows that Paul will actually have to fight someone soon. Finally, Paul meets with Dr. Yue, a doctor of the Atreides, who gives him some information about the life forms of Arrakis, including the planet's giant sandworms. Within the first few pages, Dune buries us in an avalanche of names, people, places, things, and concepts. Many of these new terms are explained, but many are not, and we are forced to either wait until they are explained, or to try and figure things out using context clues. Most editions of Dune actually contain a glossary in the back, but it's not exhaustive, and there was no glossary when Dune was published serially in Startling Stories magazine in the early 1960s. It's comforting to realize that once we finish the book, almost everything makes sense. The second reading of Dune, particularly after reading the appendices, is often as enjoyable as the first, since we are then more aware of the implications of each event, both small and large. The novel immediately introduces us to Paul Atreides, who is the novel's main character. Although Paul is 15 years old when the story begins, he never seems to act like a child or even a teenager. When the Reverend Mother tests him, he shows some mild arrogance and petulance, but no more than any adult undergoing such a test would. Paul's success with the test and his resistance to a great amount of pain makes him seem even older. One idea that is not fully explored in Dune is the Reverend Mother's suggestion that Paul may be an animal instead of a human being. Prior to the test, Paul recites to himself a kind of mantra that partially explains the differences between animals and human beings. Quote, "Animal pleasures remain close to the sensation levels and avoid the perceptual. The human requires a background grid through which to see the universe." These semi-scientific, semi-religious phrases are puzzling, and since they are never really explained, it's difficult to understand the difference between the author's definitions of animal and human. Judging from the test, however, it seems that people like the Reverend Mother believe that some human beings act just like animals and react to everything by instinct. What separates animals from humans, she believes, is the ability for humans to close off pain mentally, and to use the rational mind to overcome instinctual and irrational impulses. The mantra that Paul recites seems to help him withstand the pain of the Reverend Mother's test. The first few pages of Dune foreshadow that something destructive is in store for Duke Leto and the Atreides family. For example, the Reverend Mother warns that Paul's father, the Duke, will die soon. When she suggests that Paul could be the Kwisatz Haderach, we begin to think that this may be an important role in the preservation of the Atreides family. The Reverend Mother's warnings concern Paul, who thinks she speaks as though his father were already dead. Furthermore, Paul's dream about the caves and the girl who calls him Usul seem to be a premonition of Paul's future and the novel's future events. Although Paul is Dune's main character, Herbert shifts perspective freely from character to character within a single page or even a few paragraphs. We read the Reverend Mother's thoughts one moment and the Lady Jessica's thoughts the next. Herbert's narrative technique provides us with an extraordinary amount of information, which is enriching, but also confusing. His narrative is flooded with countless names and concepts. The technique becomes more familiar as the novel progresses, and eventually, Herbert allows us to know what each character thinks and feels consistently. Herbert's tactic provides as much information as possible about the characters and their world, but honestly, I think it removes much of the dramatic tension that might exist if we were less aware of the characters' intentions and motivations. We learn from the introductory biographical note, as well as from Dr. Yue's own thoughts, that he is in fact the traitor to House Atreides. Paul is joined by his father, Duke Leto, in the training room. Leto admits that they are walking into a trap set by the Baron Harkonnen, but he believes that the Atreides can survive if they keep their eyes open. Leto reveals to Paul that the Harkonnens have been stockpiling melange and plan to destroy the production of it on Arrakis. Destruction of the spice supply would drive the prices of melange so high that the Harkonnens could gain control, while the Atreides shoulder the blame for the high prices. Leto also tries to allay Paul's fears. He believes that with caution, they can beat the Baron at his own game. Soon, the Atreides arrive on planet Arrakis. Lady Jessica meets her new servant, Shadout Mapes, who is a Fremen and has been sent to test Jessica. And since she is a Bene Gesserit, Jessica passes the test. She correctly identifies a strange knife that Mapes shows her, calling it a maker. Mapes refers to Jessica as the One and gives her the knife. Jessica then goes to find Paul, but instead finds Dr. Yue. Paul is sleeping in the next room after his lesson. Jessica and Yue discuss Arrakeen politics, particularly the fact that some natives resent their rulers for the extravagant use of water on a planet that practically has no water to begin with. Others believe that the Atreides bring hope to Arrakis, in contrast to the previous Harkonnen rule. Yue, who is desperately trying to conceal his traitorous plans from Jessica, reveals one small truth. His wife, who also was a Bene Gesserit, was taken and presumably killed by the Harkonnens. In Paul's bedroom, a small robotic probe appears from behind the headboard and tries to kill him, but Paul narrowly manages to escape. The Atreides troops find a man beneath the palace where he had been controlling the deadly probe. Meanwhile, Jessica discovers the palace greenhouse, where thousands of plants are given hundreds of gallons of water per day. She also discovers a note from another Bene Gesserit, Lady Fenring, who belatedly warns Jessica about the assassination attempt on Paul. Fenring also warns that a traitor is within their midst. Paul runs into the greenhouse, and Jessica tells him of the message. The Duke, rattled by the attempt on his son's life, attempts to move on with business, assigning Gurney Halleck to convince the spice miners to continue working for the Atreides. The Duke then meets with Paul and Thufir Hawat. Hawat tries to resign for his failure to protect Paul, but the Duke refuses to let him. The Duke then calls for a meeting of all of his men. Together, they make several plans: to infiltrate the spice smugglers' network and win their support, to prepare for the impending Harkonnen trap, to raid in secret the Harkonnen spice reserves on another planet, and to recruit the Fremen as warriors to fight any possible threat. The Atreides also discuss Liet, the mysterious and perhaps godlike leader of the Fremen. While at the meeting, we meet Duncan Idaho, Leto's swordmaster, who was sent ahead of the family to make contact with the Fremen, along with a Fremen leader, Stigler. Duncan has won Stigler's respect, and the Duke, with his respectful attitude, also wins Stigler's respect. Stigler offers Duncan a place within his Steech, a cave-dwelling Fremen tribe, and with the Duke's blessing, Duncan agrees to join the Fremen. As the meeting breaks up, Paul recalls the Reverend Mother Mohiam's warning that his father would not be alive for long on Arrakis. This section of Dune introduces us to Arrakis, the desert world that is the setting for most of the novel. The most important aspect of life on Arrakis is the need for water, and there are signs of this need absolutely everywhere. There's the greenhouse, which uses thousands of gallons of water a day to water its plants. The greenhouse is a show of extravagance, but also a sign of hope that the landscape of Arrakis could be terraformed into a lush paradise. A small cut that Jessica makes on Shithout Mapes stops bleeding almost instantly. Such swift clotting is necessary when water is so precious. To show his respect for the Duke, Stigler spits on the table. Stigler gives up some of his moisture, which is a precious gift. Later in the book, there are more examples of the supreme importance of water to the Fremen. Fremen do not use the word blood when referring to an important limited life force, but instead, water. The lack of water is a sign of the planet's precarious ecology. One of Dune's themes is mankind's ability to live within a planet's ecological system, and humanity's ability to disrupt that system with either good or ill results. Frank Herbert got his initial idea for Dune after studying a government ecological project designed to halt the spread of sand dunes on the Oregon coastline. Examples of humanity altering a natural ecological process can be found throughout Dune, but the most apparent is the Fremen's hopes to change Arrakis from a desert planet into a lush Edenic paradise. Such a transformation sounds ideal. However, even changes made with good intentions can have negative consequences. Herbert is well aware of the ambiguity in ecological preservation, and Dune stops short of taking a definitive stance on how humans should interact with their environment. Another important development in this section is the Fremen's identification of Jessica as being a Bene Gesserit. We learn that the Bene Gesserit have sometime in the distant past traveled the galaxy to many worlds, implanting generic myths and prophecies about themselves that later generations of Bene Gesserit could use to their advantage if they become stranded on an unfamiliar planet. In this case, the Fremen have learned legends of a Bene Gesserit woman who will be the mother of their savior. The legends were originally intended to allow a Bene Gesserit to find help if she needs it, and to be accepted by the general population if she found herself on a new planet. In the case of Jessica and the planet Arrakis, the legends will be more accurate than ever before. The sheer size and complexity of the world Herbert creates is almost overwhelming. Aside from the number of main characters, the action is set against a large background of intergalactic politics. At the core of the story is the idea that a simple desert planet like Arrakis can play a major role in determining the course of the galactic empire. The importance of Arrakis, however, lies not so much in Paul, but in the planet's production of melange, the spice drug to which so many people are addicted. The incredible value of the spice drug is the reason that the Atreides are so suspicious that the Emperor is just handing Arrakis over to them. All of the characters, from Duke Leto to Paul to Lady Jessica, know that the Atreides are walking into a trap, and while the Duke may hope that he can avoid the trap, Jessica and Paul know the truth. The Duke will not live much longer throughout the novel. There is a tension between fate and Paul's struggle to guide his own future, always feeling the presence of a self-described terrible purpose. Getting back to the story, the Baron Harkonnen's plans are coming to fruition. Thufir Hawat intercepts a note allegedly from the Baron to Lady Jessica that implicates her in a plot to betray Duke Leto. The Duke does not believe the allegation, but instantly recognizes it as a Harkonnen plot, and decides that in order to trap the Harkonnens, he must pretend to fall into the trap. He decides to allow Hawat and Duncan to think that Jessica may be guilty, though he does not actually believe the allegations himself. Some of the Fremen have started calling Paul the Mahdi, or the one who will lead us to paradise. This follows the prophecy that their messianic savior will arrive as the child of a Bene Gesserit, like Jessica. The Duke tells Paul about the Harkonnen plot to turn him against Lady Jessica, but warns him to tell no one else. The Duke also has plans to use his propaganda corps to secure the loyalty of the people of Arrakis, but he warns Paul that if anything were to go wrong, Paul should make use of his Mahdi status to gain the Fremen's respect. The Duke and Paul then meet Dr. Kynes, an Imperial ecologist sent to study Arrakis. Kynes has been ordered to betray the Atreides, but he finds himself impressed by them, despite his low expectations of their character. Kynes explains the use of still suits, special outfits that contain the amount of moisture the body uses up and are able to recycle the majority of the body's moisture. As Kynes interacts more and more with Paul, he finds that Paul oddly seems to fit the legends of the Mahdi. Kynes is also surprised to find that Leto is a penetrating man who seems interested in Kynes' plans to make Arrakis an Edenic paradise. Kynes takes the Duke and Paul to visit a spice mining operation. While they are there, the roaming spice factory is attacked by a giant sandworm. The Duke immediately takes control and makes sure to save all of the miners, leaving the spice behind. The Duke's concern for human life over spice impresses Kynes. As the Duke leaves and his ship flies away, Paul happens to spot two men that he correctly identifies as Fremen, though Kynes tries to hide that fact. Paul's mysterious skills and the Duke's concern for his workers' lives impress Kynes even more. Later that night, the Duke holds a dinner party for the distinguished members of Arrakeen society, the wealthier members of the planet. Kynes attends, and he is surprised when Jessica expresses her hope that one day Arrakis will be the lush paradise he wants it to be. Kynes asks her if she brings the shortening of a way, which roughly translates to Kwisatz Haderach. Jessica does not have the chance to answer, but it is clear that Kynes is becoming more intrigued by Jessica and Paul by the second. At the dinner party, Lady Jessica recognizes that there is at least one spy present, a guild banker. Paul seems to have recognized the banker's behavior as well, and playfully banters with him. Jessica also notes that the banker strangely seems to be terrified of Kynes. The Duke engages Kynes in discussing the possibility of changing Arrakis' climate, and Kynes reluctantly admits that there just might be enough water on Arrakis to start the process of making it an Eden. The third section of Dune introduces a complex set of character interactions. The plot becomes increasingly dense and borderline incomprehensible. At the center of the plot is a new character, Dr. Kynes. We already know that Dr. Kynes, the ecologist, or as he refers to himself, planetologist, has been ordered to sabotage the Atreides' efforts at making any money off of Arrakis. However, Kynes' initial agreement to sabotage the Atreides was more due to his own desire to hurt the Atreides' plan, rather than due to the Harkonnens bribing or bullying. Thus, Kynes is surprised when the Atreides quickly earn his respect. Kynes is impressed by Duke Leto's honest concern for the lives of men that he has not even met, and Paul fascinates him because he fulfills many of the Fremen prophecies. Paul's role as a Mahdi for the Fremen is important to Kynes, since we find out that Kynes is Liet, the godlike leader of the Fremen. Kynes' fascination with Paul becomes more important later in the novel. For now, he is still watching and weighing his options. The dinner scene in this section is, in my opinion, actually one of the funniest and most macabre scenes in the book. The dinner party is an uncomfortable affair, with many people using one another to further their own goals. Duke Leto uses the dinner as an opportunity to analyze the elite members of the new Arrakis world, but he also embarrasses himself by making it blindingly obvious just how much he intends to change their lifestyle by changing the planet's ecology. Leto is also tortured because he must pretend that he distrusts his concubine, Lady Jessica. Kynes has an alliance with Tuek, a head smuggler on Arrakis, and can intimidate the guild banker. Jessica immediately recognizes that the banker is a Harkonnen spy, and there is a tense scene in which Paul nearly gets in a fight with him. Paul and Jessica are also aware that Kynes tells several lies in the course of the dinner. As for the rest of the dinner party attendees, they are interested in finding out how they can take advantage of their new rulers. Herbert fills the party scene with a sense of tension and humor while revealing a wealth of information about the characters. The placement of the dinner party scene within the scope of the novel is important. The dinner party represents the high point of the Duke's brief reign on Arrakis. From here on, problems will mount as the Harkonnen trap quickly unfolds and unravels the Duke's power. Throughout the dinner celebration, there is a sense that the Duke's reign is fated to end, which the Reverend Mother emphasized earlier in the novel. Thus far, Herbert imbues the tone of Dune with a sense of fatalism, and the feeling that once certain events are put into motion, they will progress to a particular unavoidable conclusion. For instance, Jessica and the Reverend Mother knew that once the Emperor gave Arrakis to the Duke's situation was hopeless. He would fail and most likely die. Paul is already beginning to develop a premonition of doom, and he struggles with this sense of terrible purpose throughout the novel. Back to the story, a drunk Duncan Idaho stumbles into the Atreides castle. Jessica chastises Duncan, who in his drunken state reveals that he suspects that Jessica is a spy for the Harkonnens. Jessica, shocked, calls Hawat to meet with Duncan. She confronts him with his suspicions and tries to convince Hawat that their beliefs are irrational. Jessica explains that it is more logical to believe that the Harkonnens are making Hawat suspicious of her, but Hawat is loyal only to Duke Leto, and he cannot eliminate his suspicion of Jessica. Jessica uses the voice on him, a semi-magical tone of voice that forces Hawat to obey whatever she says. The voice surprises and disturbs Hawat, and makes him think that Jessica is an even more dangerous enemy. When Jessica and Hawat part that night, he is still suspicious. Late that night, Duke Leto is pondering a strange note he received. He hears an odd sound and investigates, discovering the dead bodies of Tuek and Shadout Mapes. Yue has shut off the house generators and the shield, leaving the Atreides castle vulnerable to attack. Yue attacks Leto and informs him that he is placing a false tooth in the Duke's mouth. The tooth will release a great poisonous gas when the Duke closes his mouth tightly. He feels badly that he has betrayed the Duke, so he tells Leto to bite down on the tooth when he is brought before the Baron Harkonnen. This way, Yue can kill the Baron and avenge his wife's death. However, Yue still feels some guilt for killing the Duke, so he has arranged for Paul and Jessica to escape safely. He takes Leto's ducal ring to give to Paul as a sign of his true intentions for Jessica and Paul to be spared. Sometime shortly thereafter, Jessica and Paul are kidnapped by the Harkonnens. The Harkonnen guards fly them into the desert, presumably to kill the pair. Jessica seduces the two guards with the voice, and while they fight over her, one guard kills the other. Jessica then distracts the remaining guard long enough for Paul to kill him. Paul and Jessica discover a small bundle inside the ship containing food, stillsuits, and other provisions, as well as the ducal ring of Paul's father. As they free themselves, more ornithopters, or small flying ships, appear over the horizon, heading towards them. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Yue confronts Baron Harkonnen and demands to know what has happened to his wife. As Yue expected, the Baron killed her long ago. The Baron then orders Pitter to kill Yue as well. The Baron's men bring Duke Leto before him, who gloats over his success at defeating the Duke. He demands to know where Jessica and Paul have fled, but Leto says that he does not know. The Baron threatens to torture Leto, getting closer to him. Leto then bites down on a false tooth, emitting a gas that instantly kills Pitter and all of the guards. But the Baron miraculously escapes. One of the Sardaukar, the elite troops of the Emperor, demands to see the Duke's body, as the Emperor had requested. The Emperor's request causes the Baron to lose face in front of his men. Paul and Jessica are now hiding in a tent from the ornithopters. Fortunately, Duncan Idaho is piloting one of the ornithopters on instructions from Yue. Yue had helped Duncan escape from the Baron's men. Duncan hides Paul and Jessica and then leaves to help the other surviving Atreides men. During this time, Paul undergoes a dramatic change. His intelligence becomes very cold and calculating, and very powerful. He is able to think ahead of his mother, a Bene Gesserit. Paul reveals to Jessica that the Duke always knew she was innocent of treachery. She grieves, but unfortunately, Paul finds that he is unable to grieve with her. As Paul sits, he suddenly has a vision. His intelligence increases and he has become hyper-aware, due in fact to the spice he has been consuming in his food. He suddenly has a prophetic dream and sees thousands of possible futures. Paul can have these visions because of the sudden increased power of his mind and his Mentat-style training. He tells Jessica that she will give birth to a daughter, despite the fact that Jessica hasn't told anyone that she's pregnant. Paul also reveals that both he and Jessica are Harkonnens, the Baron Vladimir being Jessica's unknown father. This section describes the key strategies of the Harkonnen trap, showing the Baron's military intelligence. The trap's complexity suggests that the Baron has spent many years devising his plot against the Atreides. The trap includes many different features. First, to bypass the Atreides' energy-based defense shields, intended to block lasguns or laser guns, the Harkonnens use a projectile weaponry like bullets, missiles, and artillery fire. Secondly, the Emperor is a party to the Baron's treachery. Therefore, the Sardaukar, the Emperor's ruthless elite troops, will help the Baron destroy the Atreides' troops. The Houses of the Landsraad, an overarching group of families that controls most of the galaxy, would be very upset if they discovered that the Emperor had supported the eradication of House Atreides and would likely band together to overthrow him. To prevent the Landsraad from finding out, the Sardaukar disguise themselves as Harkonnen soldiers. Finally, the Baron intends to install one of his own brethren, the Beast Rabban, one of his lesser nephews, to rule Arrakis after the Harkonnens take over. The Baron wants Rabban to oppress the Arrakeen people and make them hate him, so that when the Baron's beloved nephew, Feyd-Rautha, arrives to take Rabban's place, he will be welcomed as a hero with open arms. The Baron does not just fight against the Atreides, but he also defies his own family members as well as the Houses of the Landsraad. His outright abuse of his relationships suggests that he will not be in power for much longer. Paul, on the other hand, must learn to handle his new powers so that he does not abuse them. After the death of Paul's father, Paul's character transforms physically, mentally, and emotionally. He kills his first man, the guard on the ornithopter, as he hides in the tent. He also becomes aware of his terrible purpose in life that will haunt him for the rest of the novel. Paul must remember his training as a Mentat, but also as a Bene Gesserit. Mentats are trained to think only in logical, rational terms. Their primary skill is calculating any and every bit of information. Their minds record and analyze everything they see. However, Paul's mother has also trained him in the more intuitive, spiritual, and mystical powers of the Bene Gesserit. Paul's success lies in balancing his powers of logic and intuition. Paul's ability to handle his new powers is made even more difficult by his use of the spice. Melange heightens the user's awareness of the senses, both rational and spiritual. Paul's human brain uses only a portion of its potential until he eats the spice. He becomes hyper-aware of everything around him, and his two schools of training combine to allow him to notice every detail around him and then plug into a vast mental calculator that computes all possible outcomes of the future. Some of this computation is mystical as well, as there is no logical way that Paul could know his sister would be known as Saint Elia of the Knife, or that he would meet a girl in a cave who would call him Usul. Paul has become a kind of superhuman, capable of combining the skills of a Mentat and a Bene Gesserit. The Fremen will respect Paul's ability to balance his powers, suggesting that, unlike the Baron, Paul will rise to become the leader of the universe, and will become the Mahdi. Thus ends Act 1 of Dune. I would love to keep going, but this video is already getting quite lengthy. There is so much to this book that I didn't even get to touch on, like how personal shields work, or how Yue has undergone Imperial conditioning, which supposedly makes him physically unable to betray the Duke Leto, thus making his betrayal all the more surprising. I'll release Act 2 within the coming weeks. Let me know in the comments section if this made you excited for the movie, or if this made you want to go read Dune for yourself. Be kind to each other, and have a pleasant evening.